Tonight, we explore the very beginning of our philosophical journey, a moment that changed how humanity understands reality itself. But first, let me know in the comments where you're joining us from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, perhaps light a candle, and let's ease into tonight's philosophical journey together. In Miletus, during the early 6th century BCE, Thales looked at the stars and realized that nature might be governed by principles rather than divine whims. Envision this bustling port city where trade brought new ideas and possibilities from across the ancient world. Merchants from Egypt, Babylon, and distant lands gathered in Miletus, creating a unique atmosphere where different ways of understanding the world could meet and mingle. Thales, walking among these cosmopolitan exchanges, began to wonder, what if the cosmos wasn't governed by the arbitrary decisions of gods, but by underlying patterns that could be discovered and understood? This simple question, that the world might be understood through reason, marks the birth of Western philosophy. For countless generations, humans had explained natural phenomena through stories of divine intervention, mythological creatures, and supernatural forces. But Thales dared to look beyond these explanations and ask, what if the earth floats on water not because Poseidon commands it, but because water is the fundamental substance from which all things arise? What if celestial movements follow mathematical laws rather than the whims of star gods? We can gently turn our attention to the profound shift Thales represents, from instinct to reflection. Just as you might pause today before assuming chaos or fate when something unexpected happens, Thales was the first to systematically pause and seek natural explanations. He predicted eclipses not through oracle consultation, but through astronomical observation. He measured pyramid heights not through divine revelation, but through geometric reasoning. This methodical, questioning approach to reality became the foundation for all subsequent scientific and philosophical inquiry. Allow this insight to sink in as we consider how this ancient discovery connects to our modern lives. When we choose to examine natural causes before assuming supernatural ones, when we look for patterns in our relationships rather than accepting them as random, when we seek understanding through reason rather than surrendering to confusion, we are walking in Thales' footsteps. The same intellectual courage that drove him to question the divine order now drives us to understand psychology, to decode genetics, to map neural pathways. This dawn of wonder in ancient Miletus reminds us that every great discovery begins with someone willing to ask, what if there's a pattern here? What if there's a reason? What if understanding is possible? As we continue our journey through the great chain of being, remember that philosophy itself began with this fundamental act of curiosity, the decision to look deeper, to think longer, and to trust in the power of human reason to illuminate the mysteries of existence. In this moment, you carry forward that same ancient impulse toward understanding, toward wisdom, toward the endless human quest to know. Transport yourself to this extraordinary moment, when a mind in ancient Miletus, around 610–546 BCE, reached beyond the familiar waters of his teacher Thales, beyond the solid earth beneath his feet, beyond the fire that warmed his evenings, and dared to imagine something entirely different. Anaximander proposed that all things arise from the boundless, the empyrean, a concept that would challenge every simple material explanation and reveal humanity's early struggle to define the origin of everything itself. His insight suggests that reality extends beyond what we can see or measure, pointing towards something that could not be pinned down, measured, or contained. This was not another substance like water or air or earth. This was the absence of limitation itself. Where others saw origins in concrete things, Anaximander pointed to something that defied definition, not empty space, but pregnant with potential. the eternal womb from which all opposites emerge and to which they return. Consider the scene, that bustling Greek colony city of Miletus, where merchants from across the known world gathered and where questions flowed as freely as wine at symposiums. Here lived a man who would become the first known philosopher to write down his thoughts, a revolutionary act in itself. Anaximander, student of Thales, inherited not just a school of thought, but a dangerous curiosity. Where Thales saw water as the fundamental principle, Anaximander asked a more profound question: what if the source of all things is precisely that which cannot be defined by any particular quality? His Pyrrho was pregnant with potential, the eternal womb from which all opposites emerge and to which they return. Hot and cold, wet and dry, light and dark, all arising from this boundless source that contains them all yet is defined by none. We find ourselves in a curious echo of this ancient insight. Our most advanced physics speaks of quantum fields that permeate all space, of dark energy driving the expansion of an ever-growing universe, of possibilities that exist in superposition until observed. The more we learn about reality, the more it seems to resist our attempts to capture it completely. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells us that at the most fundamental level, reality is inherently indeterminate. Much like Anaximander's Pyrrho, there are aspects of existence that cannot be pinned down to precise values. Our cosmologists speak of a universe that may be infinite in scope, containing possibilities our minds can barely conceive. In quantum mechanics, we encounter what scientists call virtual particles, ephemeral disturbances that emerge from and return to the quantum vacuum, remarkably similar to Anaximander's description of things arising from and returning to the boundless. But perhaps the most valuable lesson from Anaximander lies not in his specific answer, but in his willingness to embrace mystery. In our age of information overload and the illusion of total knowledge, his Pyrrho offers us a profound invitation to find peace with uncertainty, to recognize that some truths cannot be grasped by force of will or intellect alone. When we encounter the unknown, in our personal lives, our careers, our relationships, we can remember this ancient insight that reality itself is born from the boundless, the undefined, the infinite potential that exists before any particular form emerges. This is not a call to abandon reason, but to practice what we might call philosophical humility, the wisdom to know that beyond every answer lies deeper questions, beyond every certainty lies the infinite mystery from which all things arise. In embracing the Pyrrho of our own lives, we discover that uncertainty itself can become a source of peace, creativity, and growth. Carrying this recognition of the boundless that surrounds and sustains us, let us move forward with this ancient wisdom into our dreams. What if change is the only thing that never changes? In the city of Ephesus, flourishing around 500 BCE, a philosopher named Heraclitus stood by the flowing waters and witnessed something that would forever alter humanity's understanding of reality. No one, he realized, ever steps into the same river twice. The water that touches your feet this moment has already moved beyond you, replaced by new currents, new droplets, new possibilities. This simple observation contains one of philosophy's most profound insights. Everything flows, everything becomes, nothing remains static. In a world of constant transformation, where technology evolves overnight, where social landscapes shift beneath our feet, where even our own thoughts and feelings seem to change like weather patterns, Heraclitus offers us a radical way of seeing. What if resistance to change is not wisdom, but suffering? What if flowing with change, rather than fighting against it, might be the path to peace? Heraclitus was known in ancient times as the dark philosopher, and sometimes the weeping philosopher, not because he was perpetually sad, but because he wept for humanity's profound misunderstanding of existence itself. Born into an aristocratic family in the vibrant Greek city of Ephesus, then part of the Persian Empire, he lived during a time of tremendous upheaval. The old certainties were crumbling as new powers rose and fell. Miletus, the birthplace of earlier philosophers, had been sacked by the Persians in 494 BCE. Persian influence was spreading, and yet, amid this chaos, Heraclitus saw not disorder, but a deeper order, a pattern that could only be perceived by those willing to embrace change rather than fear it. He wrote in fragments, in paradoxical statements that challenged conventional thinking. He called himself self-taught, and had little patience for what he saw as the masses' willingness to accept comfortable illusions. For Heraclitus, most people lived as if they possessed understanding peculiar to themselves, while the fundamental truths remained hidden in plain sight. At the heart of Heraclitus' vision lies a concept he called the logos, the divine reason or principle that structures and animates all existence. This wasn't abstract speculation, but a recognition that change itself follows patterns, that opposition creates harmony, that conflict generates renewal. Fire, he believed, was the fundamental element of reality, not because it destroys, but because it transforms. It consumes while it illuminates. It changes form while maintaining essence. This is the unity of opposites. Birth contains death. Growth requires decay. Strength emerges through struggle. We see this principle everywhere around us. A business that refuses to adapt to changing markets eventually fails, while one that embraces transformation often discovers new opportunities. Relationships that resist the natural evolution of human connection often grow rigid and break, while those that flow with the changing seasons of intimacy deepen over time. The individual who fights against aging often misses the wisdom that comes with maturity, while one who accepts the changing seasons of life often finds unexpected beauty in each phase. Heraclitus teaches us to distinguish between the changeable and the unchangeable aspects of our existence, our reactions to circumstances, our interpretations of events, our emotional responses. These we can learn to flow with, to guide rather than resist. But certain deeper truths remain constant: the interconnectedness of all things, the rhythm of growth and renewal, the fundamental reality that resistance to necessary change creates suffering. When we step into Heraclitus' river and accept that the water touching us now is already flowing away, we discover something paradoxical. In embracing impermanence, we find a deeper stability. Not the rigid certainty of trying to stop time, but the flexible strength of learning to dance with time's ever-changing melody. As our journey through the great chain of being continues, we carry with us this understanding that all of existence is one great river of becoming, and wisdom lies not in stepping out of the flow, but in learning to navigate its currents with grace. We leave Heraclitus by his river, carrying the flame of transformation within us. In our next exploration, we turn to another ancient voice that offers a different perspective on the nature of being itself. In the quiet colony of Elea, nestled along the southern Italian coast around the early 5th century BCE, a radical voice emerged to challenge everything Heraclitus had taught. Where Heraclitus saw eternal flux, Parmenides experienced a visionary journey that revealed an unchanging reality beneath all appearances. His shocking claim that change itself is illusion, that only being is real, would echo through philosophy for millennia, speaking even now to our struggles with perception and objective truth. Parmenides composed a remarkable poem that would challenge everything we think we know about reality. Consider this: a philosopher who, rather than observing the changing world around him, dared to claim that change itself was the greatest illusion of all. His poem, On Nature, begins not with empirical observation, but with a mystical revelation, a journey undertaken with a goddess who guides him to the profound truth that underlies all appearances. We can gently turn our attention to the heart of Parmenides, radical insight. He argues with startling logical precision. Anything that truly exists must simply be. Non-being cannot exist, for the simple reason that we cannot think about what is not. There is nothing for the mind to grasp. Therefore, only being exists, and being must be one, complete, and unchanging. To suggest that something comes into being implies it came from non-being, which Parmenides declares is impossible. This creates what scholars call the Eleatic challenge. How do we account for apparent diversity and change in a world where only unchanging unity can truly exist? The implications cascade through his reasoning. If being is one, then space and time themselves, which suggest separation and movement, must be illusions of perception. What we call becoming is merely the shifting shadows of our limited understanding. Hold this gently. As we consider how this ancient insight speaks to us now, we grapple with questions of objective truth in an age of infinite perspectives, what we call post-truth, politics, and the fragmentation of shared reality. Parmenides anticipated this challenge by insisting that beneath all our conflicting opinions and perceptions lies a single, unchanging truth. His philosophy offers a different lens on our current struggles with fake news and alternative facts. Perhaps our disagreements stem not from multiple valid viewpoints, but from our failure to perceive the underlying unity of being. In our daily decisions, from career changes to relationship choices, we often react to surface appearances, the immediate circumstances, the emotional urgency, the apparent opportunities. Parmenides invites us to pause and question what remains constant beneath these changing circumstances. What is the unchanging essence that we might be overlooking in our hurried judgments? In daily life, this ancient wisdom suggests a profound practice of inner stillness. Before making significant decisions, you might spend time in quiet reflection, not simply weighing pros and cons, but asking, what is the unchanging reality here? What remains true regardless of my emotions or immediate circumstances? Parmenides would argue that much of our suffering comes from our attachment to appearances, situations that seem solid and permanent, but are merely temporary configurations of the one reality. His vision offers a radical alternative to our restless, constantly changing mental landscape. The possibility of anchoring ourselves in the steady ground of being itself. We leave Parmenides in his divine stillness, having glimpsed the possibility that beneath all the flux and movement of our experience lies an unchanging truth, serene, complete, and ever-present, waiting patiently for those who would venture beyond the world of appearances to discover the profound peace that dwells in the stillness of being. Yet in another corner of the Greek world, a different voice laughed at humanity's pretensions to cosmic understanding. In 5th century BCE Abdera, around 460–370 BCE, Democritus imagined that all things are composed of indivisible atoms in the void. Witness this ancient Greek city on the northern Aegean coast, where the Mediterranean breeze carries whispers of profound revelation. Here lived a philosopher whose mind could perceive what eyes could not see, whose laughter echoed through markets and academies alike. Democritus moved through his daily life with a peculiar joy, a gentle humor that those around him often misunderstood. They saw him as eccentric, perhaps slightly mad, as he would burst into laughter at the most ordinary moments. But what they didn't understand was that Democritus was laughing at the cosmic joke of human ignorance, the way we mistake shadows for substance, the way we build our entire world upon foundations we cannot even perceive. His insight was revolutionary in its elegant simplicity. Everything we see, touch, taste, and experience is composed of countless tiny, indivisible particles moving through empty space. Imagine the radical nature of this thought. While others debated the nature of gods and forms, while philosophers argued about justice and virtue, Democritus was proposing that reality itself operates according to invisible mechanics. He called these fundamental particles atoms, not because they were indivisible in our modern sense, but because atomos meant uncuttable, the smallest possible unit of being. The void, the empty space between atoms, was just as essential to his understanding as the atoms themselves. For in the space between, in the nothingness that seems so empty, the dance of existence unfolds. What makes Democritus particularly fascinating is how he arrived at this understanding through pure philosophical reasoning, long before any instrument could reveal the hidden structure of matter. He argued that matter cannot be infinitely divisible. There must be some fundamental unit that cannot be cut further. And he proposed that these atoms come in countless varieties, some smooth and round, others sharp and jagged, some like tiny hooks that catch and bind, others that allow for subtle interactions. They move constantly through the void, colliding and separating in an eternal dance of existence. His famous words capture this perfectly. By convention, sweet is sweet. By convention, bitter is bitter. By convention, hot is hot. By convention, cold is cold. By convention, color is color. But in reality, there are atoms and the void. The profound joy Democritus found in his laughter was not mockery, but recognition, a deep appreciation for the magnificent complexity that underlies the simplicity of our daily experience. He saw how humans build elaborate stories, create intricate belief systems, and construct entire civilizations upon perceptions that are, in his view, merely the result of invisible atoms interacting in ways our senses interpret as colors, flavors, and textures. Today's atomic theory, with its electrons and protons and quantum mechanics, validates the core intuition of this ancient thinker. We now know that the solid world we inhabit is, indeed, largely empty space, with incredibly small particles dancing through it. But perhaps more importantly, Democritus offers us a beautiful meditation. Unseen structures shape our visible lives. Just as atoms form the foundation of physical reality, invisible patterns of thought, emotion, and connection form the foundation of our lived experience. In this understanding, we find both humility and wonder, the humility to recognize how little we truly see, and the wonder to appreciate the magnificent architecture of existence that surrounds us always. Consider this question. What if the greatest danger is living without reflection? Socrates. Question shakes our assumptions about success and happiness. In the bustling agora of ancient Athens, during the 5th century BCE, beneath the golden Mediterranean sun, there walked a man whose very presence challenged what people thought they knew. Merchants hawked wares, politicians debated in the shade, citizens exchanged news, all moving through life with the confidence of certainty. This peculiar philosopher would approach them with a question that rattled complacency like stones thrown into still water. Socrates discovered something profound. Wisdom begins, not with having answers, but with recognizing our ignorance. At his trial in 399 BCE, he famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." He meant that life without critical self-examination lacks real value. He wandered the marketplace like a careful investigator, gently probing the beliefs people held most dear. When a politician claimed to know justice, Socrates asked questions until confident answers crumbled, revealing the uncertain ground beneath those convictions. His method, later named the Socratic method, was revolutionary in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Rather than lecturing, he engaged others in dialogue, asking them to examine their own thoughts. If a young man declared he knew courage, Socrates might ask whether charging into battle always shows courage or whether sometimes retreat requires greater bravery. Through such gentle examinations, he helped people see that treasured beliefs often rest on assumptions rather than understanding. The beauty of Socrates' approach lies in its humility. He did not claim special knowledge or divine revelation. He positioned himself as a fellow seeker, admitting he knew only that he did not know. This humility became his strength, allowing him to perceive the gap between what we think we know and what we actually understand. In an age of information overload and instant opinions, the Socratic path offers a different way, thoughtful questioning instead of quick certainty. As you reflect on this, consider how often you operate on autopilot, accepting beliefs because they feel familiar, deciding because it's practical, living by patterns inherited from others. Socrates invites us to pause in that gentle space between assumption and inquiry, to examine our lives as we would a treasured object. In that examination, we may discover not only what we do not know, but what we truly seek to understand. The examined life, Socrates suggests, becomes not just worth living, but worth living deeply. Socrates' most famous student would take this call to examination even further, asking not just what we know, but what reality itself truly is. For if Socrates taught us to question our beliefs, Plato dared to question the very fabric of reality. Imagine, if you will, a world of perpetual twilight, where shadows dance upon a cavern wall, and these shadows are all you have ever known. This is the world of the prisoners in Plato's famous allegory from his work, The Republic. Written around 380 BCE, they have been chained since birth, their necks fixed so they cannot turn, forced to watch only the shadows cast by a fire behind them. These shadows, shifting and changing, constitute their entire reality. But one day, one prisoner is freed. Imagine the disorientation, the terror, the overwhelming sensation of moving from the known into the radically unknown. This prisoner represents each of us at the moment we begin to question our assumptions about reality. As this freed prisoner emerges from the cave, he encounters a gradual revelation. First, he sees the shadow's source, the fire that cast them. Then he sees the objects that created the shadows. Finally, he sees the sun itself, the source of all light and life. This ascent represents the journey of philosophical education, moving from mere opinion to true knowledge. But Plato's insight goes beyond this simple progression. He introduces the revolutionary concept of the forms, eternal, perfect, unchanging realities that exist beyond our physical world. The physical objects we encounter are merely imperfect reflections or shadows of these perfect forms. When we see a beautiful object, we recognize its beauty because we have some intuition of the form of beauty itself. This is why we can judge one sunset more beautiful than another. We are comparing them against an ideal that exists beyond the material world. In our digital age, consider how this ancient insight speaks to our experience of reality. The images we see on our screens, the carefully curated personas on social media, the filtered versions of life presented to us, all these are like shadows on the cave wall, projections of something else, something more complex and nuanced than what appears. The forms in Plato's philosophy are not merely abstract concepts. They represent the deepest truths of existence. The form of justice, beauty, goodness, truth, these are more real than the flawed examples we encounter in daily life. When we seek justice, we aren't just following social conventions. We are reaching toward an ideal that exists beyond human constructs. This perspective fundamentally changes how we approach moral and philosophical questions. Rather than accepting that truth is merely what appears to us or what majority opinion claims, Plato suggests that truth exists as an objective reality to be discovered. The philosopher's role is not to create truth, but to recognize and contemplate these eternal forms. This creates a profound humility in the face of reality. We are not the creators of truth, but its seekers. Consider how this relates to our information-saturated present. We are bombarded with competing claims, each presented with conviction and apparent evidence. Like the prisoners in the cave, we can become trapped in the shadows of information, mistaking the projection for the reality. Plato's insight suggests that beneath the surface, disagreements and shifting opinions lies a deeper truth to be pursued through patient philosophical inquiry. What does this mean for us in our daily lives? How can we apply Plato's insight about the hierarchy of reality? The first step is cultivating what he calls episteme, true knowledge, as opposed to doxa, mere opinion or appearance. This requires developing the courage to question our assumptions and the patience to look beyond surface impressions. In our relationships, instead of reacting to the behaviors we observe, we might ask, what essential human qualities is this person embodying or failing to embody? In our civic life, rather than accepting political narratives at face value, we might seek to understand the deeper principles at stake. The challenge, as Plato recognized, is that returning to the cave, sharing these insights with others, is both difficult and often unwelcome. Those still trapped in the shadow world may resent the one who has seen the sun, preferring their comfortable illusions. Yet this is the philosopher's duty, to make the ascent and then return, bringing what light they can to illuminate the shadows, carrying with us the image of the freed prisoner, no longer satisfied with shadows, compelled to seek deeper truths that exist beyond the immediate impressions of our senses. We discover that Plato understood something crucial. Knowledge of truth brings responsibility. But Plato understood something crucial. Knowledge of truth brings responsibility. The one who has seen the sun cannot simply remain in its light. They must return to the cave. And this raises a profound political question. When Plato imagined the philosopher king, he posed a radical experiment. What if wisdom, not power, governed the state? Envision a vessel upon turbulent seas. The owner is strong but knows nothing of navigation. The sailors argue loudly over who should steer, each claiming expertise they don't possess. Meanwhile, the true navigator, the one who has studied the stars, who understands the wind and currents, stands ignored, considered useless by the crew. The ship drifts toward rocks. This is Plato's ship of state, and it reveals his deepest political concern. Democracy elevates persuasion over knowledge, charisma over competence. The masses follow whoever speaks most convincingly, even as disaster approaches. But Plato envisioned a different possibility. What if those who had glimpsed the forms, who had seen justice itself, beauty itself, the good itself beyond the cave's shadows, what if they governed? In his ideal city of Callipolis, society would function like a perfectly tuned instrument. Three classes in harmony: producers who create and sustain, auxiliaries who protect and defend, and guardians who govern with philosophical insight. But here's the crucial difference. These philosopher kings would not seek power. They would accept it reluctantly as a duty. Why reluctantly? Because anyone who wants to rule is precisely the wrong person to do so. Desire for power corrupts. Only those who would rather contemplate eternal truths, who must be compelled to leave the realm of wisdom and descend into the messy work of governance, only they can be trusted. And to prevent corruption, Plato proposed radical measures. Philosopher kings would own no private property, would share all possessions in common, would raise children collectively. They would live simply, cultivating virtue rather than wealth, wisdom rather than influence. Is this practical? Perhaps not. but Plato's deeper point endures. We face a fundamental tension between democracy and expertise. The masses may not choose wisely, experts may not be persuasive, and those most qualified to lead may be least interested in leading. In our contemporary moment, this ancient tension sharpens. We watch leaders master the art of persuasion while lacking the wisdom to govern. We witness expertise dismissed as elitism and charisma elevated over competence. Social media amplifies the loudest voices, not the wisest ones. Plato challenges us with uncomfortable questions. Are we choosing leaders based on their capacity for deep reflection and moral courage, or their ability to entertain and divide? Do we value wisdom over performance, truth over spectacle? As you consider these questions in the quiet of this moment, perhaps reflect, what if we supported not the candidate who promises the most, but the one who demonstrates the deepest capacity for seeing beyond immediate concerns to enduring principles of justice and the common good? The philosopher king may be an impossible ideal, but the question Plato raises remains urgently real. How do we ensure that those who govern possess not just power, but wisdom? Plato's vision of wisdom governing the state would profoundly influence his greatest student, yet Aristotle would offer a different perspective on the nature of reality, one grounded not in eternal forms beyond this world, but in careful observation of the world itself. What if every living thing has a purpose guiding its development? This question led Aristotle to revolutionize how we understand life itself. Consider the ancient Lyceum in Athens, a place of learning where Aristotle walked among students and scholars around 335 BCE, carefully observing the natural world with an attention that would transform philosophy forever. Here, in these gardens and walkways, he noticed something profound, that living beings don't simply grow randomly, but seem to move toward definite forms, toward what they are meant to become. An oak tree doesn't grow by accident, it grows toward oak tree-ness. A human being doesn't merely develop randomly, there's an inner direction toward what it means to be fully human. This insight would reshape not just biology, but our entire understanding of existence itself. Aristotle's genius lay in his patient, systematic observation. In the Lyceum, he catalogued hundreds of species, noting their characteristics, their development patterns, their behaviors. But unlike his teacher, Plato, who sought explanations in invisible, perfect forms, Aristotle looked to what he could directly observe. Yet, what he discovered was equally remarkable, that within each living thing exists what he called telos, an inner purpose, a directing principle toward completion. A seed contains within itself the pattern of the mature tree. A child carries within the potential of the adult. This wasn't merely mechanical growth, but something more like a journey toward fulfillment, toward becoming what one truly is. It was as if nature itself were a vast school, with each being learning to become its most authentic self. But Aristotle's insights reached far beyond biology. If living things have purposes, then so do our lives, our choices, our very existence. He argued that happiness, eudaimonia, comes not from pleasure or wealth, but from fulfilling our distinctively human function, the exercise of reason in accordance with virtue. Here was a profound shift. Rather than searching for meaning in external things, Aristotle pointed us inward toward the cultivation of character and the actualization of our highest potential. Every choice we make, every habit we form, either draws us toward or away from becoming who we truly are. The angry person, the dishonest person, the lazy person, each is failing to become what human nature calls them to be. This wasn't moral judgment, but philosophical observation, that our choices shape our very essence, helping or hindering our journey toward authentic selfhood. consider how this wisdom speaks to our lives today. In an age of endless options and constant distraction, Aristotle's ancient insights offer a compass. When we pause before making a decision, choosing between scrolling mindlessly or reading something meaningful, between speaking harshly or with kindness, between pursuing money that doesn't satisfy or work that actually matters, we can ask ourselves, which choice moves me toward becoming who I truly am? Which aligns with my deepest values and highest potential? This isn't about perfection, but about direction. It's about cultivating the habit of asking not just, what do I want, but what am I meant to become? The oak tree doesn't struggle with its identity. It simply grows toward oak treeness. Perhaps we, too, can find peace by growing toward our own deepest nature, trusting that within each of us exists the seeds of who we are meant to be. Aristotle's careful observations in the Lyceum reveal to us a profound truth, that existence itself has an inner logic, a movement toward fulfillment that we can learn to recognize and honor. In seeking our purpose, we need not look to distant ideals, but to the nature of what we already are. But how, practically, do we align with this purpose? How do we become who we're meant to be? Aristotle's answer was both elegant and challenging, through the constant practice of finding balance. Let us turn our attention to this profound observation from the Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle invites us to consider how the human soul finds its way through the wilderness of excessive passions and deficient virtues. Witness a young warrior standing at the gates of battle. In one direction lies the cliff of recklessness, charging forward without thought, driven by pride and impulse. In the other direction yawns the abyss of cowardice, frozen by fear, paralyzed by self-preservation. Between these two precipices stretches the narrow path of courage, not because it is easy, but because it is wise. Aristotle understood that this narrow path is not some mystical void, but the cultivated ground where practical wisdom takes root and flourishes. This is the golden mean, not an average between extremes, but the optimal point where human excellence reveals itself. Consider how this principle unfolds in the rhythm of daily life. Take generosity, for instance, wasteful spending masquerading as kindness on one side, miserly hoarding disguised as prudence on the other. Between them lies the steady hand of magnanimity, knowing when to give and when to preserve, understanding that true benevolence requires both compassion and discernment. Or consider truthfulness, brutal honesty that wounds unnecessarily on one extreme, polite deception that avoids responsibility on the other. The golden mean speaks in tones of kindness while remaining anchored in integrity. Each virtue becomes a delicate dance, and Aristotle reminds us that the music of life is most beautiful when we learn its steps. Where social media amplifies the loudest voices and algorithmic engagement rewards the most extreme positions, Aristotle's wisdom feels both ancient and urgently needed. Political discourse has become a theatre of absolutes, where compromise is viewed as weakness and moderation as indifference. But the golden mean reminds us that the middle path is not the path of mediocrity, it is the path of mastery. When we seek to understand rather than to win, when we ask what serves the common good rather than what serves our immediate interests, we discover that the most profound changes in human history have emerged not from the extremes, but from those who dared to stand in the difficult space between competing truths. Carrying forward this understanding, let us remember that virtue is not found in the comfortable territories we already inhabit, but in the constant practice of seeking balance, of choosing courage over convenience, of finding wisdom in the space between certainty and doubt. In the great chain of being, we discover that our highest nature emerges not through escape from our human limitations, but through the patient cultivation of excellence within them. Beyond the grand academy of Plato and the columned Lyceum of Aristotle stood something far humbler. Athens, around 306 BCE, beyond the busy agora, past the temples, a modest dwelling with a garden. Here, in this quiet green space, Epicurus welcomed students, friends, even women and slaves, all remarkable for his time, to explore perhaps the most intimate question of human existence. What does it truly mean to live well? Born on the island of Samos in 341 BCE, Epicurus lived through tremendous upheaval. Alexander the Great reshaped the known world, and in the chaos following Alexander's death, Epicurus experienced displacement and uncertainty. Perhaps this shaped his profound insight. True contentment cannot depend upon what fortune gives or takes away. In the garden, Epicurus and his companions ate simple meals, bread, water, occasionally wine, and found that simplicity was not deprivation, but liberation. He once wrote that he could rival Zeus in happiness with only a barley cake and water. Not gold, not power, not endless feasts, barley and water. He called this state of peaceful contentment ataraxia, freedom from disturbance. To achieve it, he taught, we must understand our desires. Some are natural and necessary, food when hungry, shelter from cold. Others are natural but unnecessary, elaborate cuisine when simple nourishment would suffice. Still others are neither natural nor necessary, fame, excessive wealth, power, vain desires that society whispers we must pursue, but which can never truly satisfy. Beyond taming desire, Epicurus recognized fear as the great thief of tranquility. Two fears in particular, fear of the gods and fear of death. The gods, he taught, exist, but care nothing for human affairs. They're too blessed to concern themselves with punishing or rewarding mortals. And death? He addressed it with elegant simplicity. Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. Therefore, death is nothing to us. Allow this insight to settle gently. If we release the grip of endless wanting and quiet unfounded anxieties, what remains is something precious, calm, steady joy. As we feel overwhelmed by notifications, obligations, and the relentless pressure to acquire and achieve, we experience what Epicurus diagnosed long ago, a soul disturbed by unnecessary desires and unfounded fears. The minimalist movement, the desire to declutter not just our homes but our minds, these echo Epicurus across 23 centuries, resting in the gentle wisdom of the garden. We might ask, what unnecessary desires disturb my peace? What fears, perhaps unfounded, keep me from simple contentment? The invitation is not to abandon all ambition, but to examine whether what we chase brings us closer to tranquility or further from it. Tonight, perhaps practice a small Epicurean experiment. Notice one thing you desire that, upon reflection, you don't truly need. Notice one fear that, when examined calmly, loses some of its power. In that gentle releasing lies the first step toward what Epicurus called the gentle life. Before Epicurus cultivated his garden of tranquility, another philosophical movement had already challenged conventional wisdom with even more radical simplicity. The Cynics, whose very name would become synonymous with rejection of social norms, produced perhaps the most memorable philosopher of antiquity. Around 300 BCE, somewhere in the waters between Phoenicia and Athens, a merchant ship broke apart upon the waves. Among its cargo of precious purple dye, there was a man named Zeno, born in the city of Citium on the island of Cyprus. Everything he had built, his wealth, his trade, his certainty about the future, all of it sank beneath the Mediterranean. And yet, as we shall see, this moment of complete destruction became the fertile ground from which one of humanity's most enduring philosophical traditions would grow. Disaster can become transformation. Washed ashore in Athens, Zeno wandered into a bookseller's shop and discovered Xenophon's Memorabilia, a work portraying the life and teachings of Socrates. Something stirred within him. He asked the bookseller where he might find such philosophers, And at that very moment, Crates of Thebes, the renowned Cynic philosopher, walked past. The bookseller pointed, and Zeno followed. His old life had ended. A new one was about to begin. After years studying under Crates, Zeno refined and expanded what he learned. Around 301 BCE, he began teaching in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, a public colonnade on the northern edge of the Athenian agora. This was not a private academy behind closed doors. It was open to anyone who wished to listen. And from this porch, this Stoa, his philosophy took its name, Stoicism. What Zeno taught there was deceptively simple in its foundation. He declared that virtue, and virtue alone, is the only true good. Wealth may come and go, as his shipwreck had taught him. Health fluctuates. Fame is fickle. Even our loved ones are not permanent fixtures in our lives. But virtue, the cultivation of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, this belongs to us entirely. It cannot be taken away by storms or circumstance. It remains ours as long as we tend to it. The Stoics made a distinction that echoes through the centuries into our present moment. They divided all things into two categories, those within our control and those beyond it. Our judgments, our intentions, our efforts, these belong to us. The weather, the economy, the opinions of others, the outcome of events, these do not. Consider how much of our suffering arises from forgetting this simple division. We agonize over what people think of us. We exhaust ourselves trying to control outcomes that were never ours to determine. We mistake external success for inner worth. Zeno himself lived this teaching. Ancient sources describe him as leading a spare, ascetic life despite his former wealth. He chose simplicity not from poverty, but from understanding that simplicity frees the mind. He taught publicly for decades, and when he died around 262 BCE, Athens honored him with a public funeral, a testament to the respect he had earned. The seeds he planted would grow for centuries. His successor, Cleanthes, continued the work, and then came Chrysippus, who would transform Stoicism into something even more powerful. Chrysippus of Soli, who became the third head of the Stoic school around 230 BCE, answered a crucial question with remarkable precision. What if emotional peace depends on judgment rather than circumstance? While Zeno established that we must distinguish what lies within our control, Chrysippus showed us exactly how our judgments create our emotional reality. He developed a systematic approach to examining our thoughts, like a skilled physician diagnosing illness at its source. Athens, shadows lengthening across the Stoa Poikile. Chrysippus gathers students and presents a scenario. A man loses his fortune in a shipwreck. One student feels devastated, another feels liberated. The event is identical, but the suffering differs entirely. Why? Because, Chrysippus explains, between the event and our emotion lies a hidden step, our judgment about what this event means. I am ruined, thinks one man. I am freed from distraction, thinks another. The shipwreck hasn't changed. The judgment has. This insight that we suffer not from events but from our opinions about events became the foundation for examining our automatic thoughts. When traffic delays your journey, you face a choice point. Judge it as intolerable frustration and suffer. Recognize it as an opportunity for unexpected solitude and find peace. The traffic is the same. Your judgment makes the difference. Modern cognitive therapy, unknowingly walking in Chrysippus' footsteps, helps people identify these rapid judgments and question their truth. The Stoic philosopher would recognize this immediately. We are not victims of our circumstances, but of our unexamined interpretations. We discover emotional tranquility is not a gift from fortune, but a skill we cultivate through disciplined clarity about what we tell ourselves. When Diogenes lived in a large ceramic jar, he demonstrated a shocking commitment to freedom from convention. Witness this ancient philosopher around 350 BCE, not in grand temples or academic halls, but in the simplest shelter imaginable, a large clay storage jar, weathered and humble, becoming his entire world. This wasn't poverty by necessity, but poverty by philosophical choice. In the bustling streets of Athens, where marble columns reached toward the heavens and citizens dressed in their finest robes, here was a man who had reduced his existence to the most elemental necessities. The jar became his laboratory for understanding what it truly means to be free. What did Diogenes discover in that cramped space? That liberation wasn't about accumulating more, but about needing less. That authentic living wasn't measured by social approval, but by inner coherence. When Alexander the Great, ruler of the known world, came to visit Diogenes in his dwelling, he found the philosopher basking in simple sunlight. Alexander offered to grant him anything he desired: wealth, power, influence. Diogenes' response was devastating in its simplicity. "Move, you're blocking my sun." Here was a man who had achieved something remarkable. He had made himself invulnerable to the world's greatest temptations. The power of emperors meant nothing when you had already discovered the greater power of radical self-sufficiency. His rejection wasn't born of bitterness or resentment, but from a profound understanding that most human suffering comes not from lack, but from the endless pursuit of things that cannot satisfy the deeper self. Diogenes walked through Athens with a lit lantern in daylight, claiming to be looking for a man. The passerby must have thought him mad, but his search was profoundly philosophical. He was seeking authenticity in a world of performances, genuine human beings beneath the masks of social roles. What he discovered was that most people live in elaborate prisons of their own making, bound by imaginary rules, enslaved to the opinions of others, trapped in cycles of desire that can never truly be fulfilled. The most profound revelation of his dwelling was this: the mind that accepts unnecessary limitations will find them everywhere, while the mind that questions their necessity often finds unexpected pathways to freedom. Consider how many of your daily anxieties stem not from genuine needs, but from imagined requirements: the latest technology, the perfect social media presence, the appearance of success. Diogenes understood that the human heart has infinite capacity for desire, and without conscious limitation, this capacity becomes our greatest source of suffering. His radical simplicity offers a different path. What would happen if you examined each social pressure, each material desire, each commitment made for appearances rather than authentic value? You might discover, as he did, that most of what we think we need is actually keeping us from what we most deeply want: peace, genuine connection, and the freedom to be fully ourselves. The jar was never a limitation. It was a lens that clarified what truly mattered. While Diogenes rejected social conventions with radical simplicity, another philosopher took skepticism even further, questioning not just society's rules, but the very possibility of certain knowledge itself. Transport yourself to walking through an ancient marketplace, where merchants from distant lands display goods you've never seen, speak languages that sound like music to unfamiliar ears, and practice customs that challenge everything you thought you knew about how life should be lived. This was the very world that confronted the Greek philosopher Pyrrho of Elis around 300 BCE, as he traveled with Alexander the Great through India and encountered the gymnosophists, philosophers whose way of being seemed to contradict every assumption about civilization and wisdom. Pyrrho observed something profound in these encounters. Each culture, each philosophical tradition, each way of perceiving reality appeared equally convincing to its adherents, yet they contradicted each other utterly. The merchants praised their goods as essential. The philosophers declared their paths to truth as the only valid ones. Yet none could provide objective proof that transcended their particular perspective. This led Pyrrho to a revolutionary insight, what he called epoché, the deliberate suspension of judgment. Rather than grasping for certainty like a drowning person clutches at floating debris, Pyrrho discovered that true calm comes from releasing our desperate need to know and instead resting in what he called ataraxia, a state of undisturbed tranquility that arises when we cease our constant mental wrestling with contradictory appearances. But this was not passive resignation or intellectual cowardice, quite the opposite. Pyrrho found that by suspending judgment about ultimate truths, he could engage more fully with the immediate reality before him, like a calm lake that reflects the sky more clearly than turbulent waters ever could. The mind, free from dogmatic attachment, becomes a more accurate instrument for navigating life's practical demands. When we encounter unfamiliar cultures, radical political perspectives, or spiritual practices that challenge our worldview, the Pyrrhonian approach suggests we can remain open and responsive without being swept away by either uncritical acceptance or defensive rejection. We learn to say, with genuine intellectual humility, that things are no more one way than another, that our current understanding may be partial or entirely mistaken. Where social media creates echo chambers and political polarization seems to deepen daily, Pyrrho's wisdom offers a path toward equanimity through what we might call informed openness. Consider how differently we might approach contentious debates about climate change, social justice, or religious belief if we could hold our views with less rigid certainty while maintaining engagement and care. The Pyrrhonian practice doesn't demand that we abandon our convictions or become passive in the face of injustice. Rather, it suggests we can act with conviction while holding our interpretations lightly, committed to justice while remaining open to deeper understanding, engaged with the world while free from dogmatic attachment. This creates space for genuine dialogue, growth, and the possibility that we might learn something essential from those whose perspectives differ radically from our own. The practical application of Pyrrhonian calm begins with a simple but profound practice. When you notice yourself forming strong opinions about complex issues, pause and ask yourself, what if I'm missing something essential? What evidence would change my mind? And am I willing to remain open to that evidence? This is not weakness, but intellectual courage, the strength to admit uncertainty while continuing to act thoughtfully in the world. Just as a skilled navigator uses multiple reference points rather than relying on a single fixed star, we can navigate life's complexities by remaining softly attentive to multiple perspectives while still making thoughtful choices. In this way, Pyrrho's ancient insight becomes a modern prescription for the kind of calm, open-minded engagement that our polarized world desperately needs. In imperial Rome around 4 BCE 65 CE, the Stoic philosopher Seneca would use his training to navigate political danger, unlike anything his Greek predecessors had faced. Here he writes letters on tranquility and adversity, teaching resilience under pressure, not as abstract theory, but as lived necessity. Witness Lucius Annaeus Seneca in his study during the reign of Emperor Nero, particularly during the early 60s CE. The weight of political uncertainty hangs heavy in the air like morning mist over the Tiber. Yet here, in this very moment of danger, Seneca takes up his stylus and begins to write. These would become some of history's most profound letters on tranquility of mind, words forged in the furnace of real adversity, not abstract speculation. He writes not from the safety of academic retreat, but from the treacherous corridors of imperial power, where one wrong word could mean death, where philosophers were made advisors and executioners in the same breath. Seneca understood something profound about the human condition that resonates across millennia. He realized that external circumstances, whether political persecution, financial loss, or social upheaval, are beyond our ultimate control. What we can control, however, is how we respond. In his letters to his friend Lucilius, he writes about tranquility not as the absence of storms, but as learning to sail within them. What is grief but an opinion, he asks. This is not philosophical detachment from reality, but rather a deeper engagement with it. Seneca was not indifferent to suffering. His letters pulse with genuine concern for human welfare. Rather, he discovered that our reactions to events often create more suffering than the events themselves. When we learn to examine our judgments about circumstances, we find an inner fortress that no external force can breach. This ancient wisdom speaks directly to our age of perpetual stress and information overload. We navigate our own imperial courts of corporate boardrooms, social media storms, and economic uncertainties. The techniques Seneca developed for surviving Nero's court translate remarkably well to current challenges. When crisis erupts in our lives, and it will, in ways both large and small, the ancient Stoic response is to pause, breathe, and ask, what is truly in my control here? Often, we discover that our power extends further than we initially believed. We cannot control the economic downturn, but we can control our response to it. We cannot control others, opinions of us, but we can control how we conduct ourselves. We cannot control the pandemic, the political climate, or the weather, but we can control our judgments, our efforts, and our character. Consider how this might transform your approach to the next challenge that arrives in your life. Instead of the immediate surge of panic or anger, Seneca invites us to cultivate what he calls the review of the day, a gentle evening examination of our responses, our judgments, and our choices, not with harsh self-criticism, but with the patience of a friend helping a friend understand themselves better. Leadership, whether in ancient Rome or modern corporations, requires this inner strength above all else. You cannot lead others to calm when you yourself are adrift in emotional storms. The greatest leaders throughout history have been those who maintained their center when everything around them was chaos. They achieved this not through mere willpower, but through philosophical practice, through the daily cultivation of wisdom, temperance, and justice. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you this image, Seneca writing by lamplight in dangerous times, not because the danger had disappeared, but because he had found something within himself that danger could not touch. Freedom comes from choosing your response, not your circumstances. Imagine a classroom in ancient Nicopolis around 108 CE. A former slave with a permanent limp walks among his students, and his very presence embodies his teaching. This is Epictetus, who knew both chains and liberation, not because his chains were removed, but because he discovered a freedom that chains could never touch. Born into slavery around 50 CE, Epictetus served under Epaphroditus, secretary to Emperor Nero. His master held power over his body, even breaking his leg in anger. But in those long hours of servitude, the young slave made a discovery. While he could not choose his circumstances, he could always choose his response. This single insight would become his life's teaching. When Emperor Domitian banished all philosophers from Rome around 93 CE, Epictetus simply gathered his few possessions and walked to Nicopolis. No rage, no resistance to what could not be changed, only acceptance of what is and deliberate choice about what to do next. In his school, he taught through vivid examples. Someone insults you, he would say. They have done something within their control. They have spoken words. But whether those words disturb your peace, that remains entirely within yours. The insult is like a stone thrown at you. You can catch it and throw it back, multiplying conflict. Or you can step aside and let it fall harmlessly to the ground. His student Arrian carefully recorded these teachings around 108 CE in the Discourses and Enchiridion, capturing this central truth. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But Epictetus didn't just teach philosophy, he taught practice. Each morning, he advised, prepare yourself. Today, I will encounter the meddlesome, the ungrateful, the arrogant. But this cannot harm me, for I cannot be forced to respond with anger or judgment. My response remains my own. This is not about suppressing genuine feelings. It's about creating a pause, a space between what happens and how you respond, where your freedom lives. In that space, you can ask, what response serves my highest values in this moment? Modern psychology calls this emotional intelligence. Epictetus called it freedom. The name matters less than the practice, noticing the space between stimulus and response, and choosing deliberately rather than reacting automatically. Tonight, as you rest, carry this thought. You cannot control the waves that life sends your way, but you can learn to navigate them with conscious choice. And in that navigation lies a freedom that no external circumstance can touch. When Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself at night, he crafted a guide for enduring leadership. Witness a man who ruled the known world, yet found his deepest wisdom in the solitude of his private chambers. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor from 161 to 180 CE, was the last of what history calls the five good emperors, a philosopher king who carried the weight of empire while maintaining his commitment to Stoic virtue. His personal journal, what we now call the Meditations, written during the later years of his reign, particularly during military campaigns in the 170s CE, was never intended for others' eyes. It was his nightly conversation with himself, a way of processing the immense burden of absolute power while remaining true to his philosophical principles. While the Stoic tradition often emphasizes emotional detachment, Marcus Aurelius discovered that true wisdom required something more nuanced, compassionate engagement without being overwhelmed by emotion. He wrote, "The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it." Yet this wasn't philosophical abstraction. During the devastating Antonine Plague, while other rulers might have fled to safety, Marcus remained with his troops and people, organizing relief efforts. His Stoicism wasn't about avoiding human connection. It was about serving others while maintaining inner stability. This delicate balance between emotional resilience and human empathy would become his defining leadership principle. Consider today's corporate executives, political leaders, and healthcare workers who face similar challenges, making life and death decisions while managing overwhelming stress, maintaining compassion in systems that often seem inhumane, and finding personal meaning within structures that can feel impersonal. Marcus understood that leadership wasn't about possessing absolute certainty or emotional immunity. Instead, it was about cultivating the wisdom to act with virtue even when the outcome remained uncertain, and the courage to remain humane even when the system demanded hardness. His famous reflection, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength," speaks directly to our contemporary struggles with information overload and decision fatigue. You can apply this through journaling to cultivate clarity, just as Marcus did in his private meditations. Not the performative journaling of social media, but the honest, fearless examination of one's own thoughts and motivations. Begin each evening by asking yourself, what did I do well today? Where did I fall short of my values? How can I serve others more effectively tomorrow? This practice doesn't require perfection. Marcus certainly wasn't perfect, despite his philosophical mastery. It requires the courage to face yourself without disguise, to acknowledge your limitations while committing to growth. In our age of constant external validation, This ancient practice offers something profound, the radical act of genuine self-knowledge. As Marcus reminds us, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Our revenge against the chaos of modern life is to maintain our philosophical center, our commitment to virtue, and our capacity for compassion, regardless of what storms may rage around us. In the cosmopolitan intellectual hub of 3rd century Alexandria, where East met West and ancient wisdom mingled with emerging spiritual traditions, there lived a philosopher named Plotinus, who undertook perhaps the most audacious quest in all of ancient thought, union with the One, the source of all reality itself. Born around 204 CE in Roman Egypt, Plotinus spent 11 profound years studying under the enigmatic Ammonius Saccas before establishing his own school in Rome around 204 CE. Plotinus discovered something extraordinary, that beneath the apparent chaos and fragmentation of our daily experience lies a profound, underlying unity, what he called the One. This is not a numerical unity, like one apple or one person, but rather the source from which all existence emanates, like light from a flame. The One is beyond being, beyond thought, beyond all categories we normally use to understand reality. Yet paradoxically, it is more real than anything we encounter in our ordinary consciousness. Through contemplation, Plotinus taught, we can ascend beyond the multiplicity of appearances toward this fundamental unity, like a pilgrim climbing toward a sacred mountain peak where all paths converge. But how does this ancient insight speak to our condition today? As we navigate an increasingly fragmented world of social media feeds, news cycles, and competing voices, Plotinus offers us something invaluable. The recognition that beneath all our differences and divisions exists a deeper reality of connection and wholeness. His vision of emanation, where the One flows outward through intellect, then soul, then into our physical world, reminds us that every moment of beauty, every act of love, every glimpse of transcendence is a trace of this original unity. When we practice mindful awareness of interconnectedness, we participate in the same mystical ascent that Plotinus described nearly 2 millennia ago. In contemporary spiritual and holistic movements, from mindfulness practices to systems thinking to ecological awareness, we find echoes of Plotinus's fundamental insight that wholeness precedes parts, that unity underlies multiplicity, that the whole is somehow present even within the fragment. His threefold structure of the One, intellect, and soul resonates with modern psychology's understanding of consciousness, with neuroscience research on unified awareness, and with quantum physics revelations about the interconnected nature of reality. What ancient mystics called the One, we might now understand as the fundamental field of connection that underlies all phenomena. As we prepare to rest, we can carry forward this profound possibility that our daily concerns, our struggles and joys, are not isolated events in a cold, mechanical universe, but moments within a vast, living unity that ancient wisdom recognized as the One. In the quiet spaces between thoughts, in the breath that connects inner and outer, in the recognition that we are less separate than we imagine, there the One reveals itself not as something distant and unreachable, but as the very ground of our being. In this understanding, we find not just philosophical insight, but the seeds of genuine peace. The soul's ascent mirrors a return to our deepest self. Students gathered in soft twilight, contemplating beauty not as mere surface pleasure, but as a ladder. In the 3rd century CE, Plotinus described a journey that begins not with external seeking, but with an inward turning. A recognition that what we chase in the world of shadows is actually found within the unchanging realm of true being. These students have stumbled upon a profound practice: beauty as teacher. When we encounter something truly beautiful, whether in art, nature, or human character, we're catching a glimpse of our own highest potential. Beauty shows us what we might become when our scattered attention and divided nature return to harmony with our deepest essence. The Neoplatonic journey is not abstract philosophy, but lived experience. It begins where you are now, immersed in the material world, distracted by multiplicity, fragmented across countless concerns. But through contemplation, patient, persistent, loving attention, the soul begins to remember its origins. First, we recognize beauty in physical things, a sunset, a mathematical proof, a moment of genuine kindness. We're drawn to these because they participate, however dimly, in eternal beauty itself. Then, through disciplined reflection, we begin to see the forms beneath appearances. We recognize that this beautiful act participates in justice. That insight reflects truth, that harmony echoes the good. We're ascending from shadows to their sources. Finally, for those rare souls who persist, comes the mystical experience Plotinus himself reported, union with the One, not as something separate from ourselves, but as the ground of our own being, which we'd forgotten in our descent into matter. This ancient wisdom resonates powerfully with modern psychology's understanding of integration. Carl Jung described individuation as the return to the self, bringing together scattered aspects of personality into coherent wholeness. This echoes beautifully the Neoplatonic soul's return to its divine source. Just as Plotinus envisioned the soul ascending through beauty, modern therapists guide people toward integration by helping them harmonize different aspects of experience: emotional and rational, intuitive and analytical, shadow and light. All aspects finding their proper place in a life seeking both truth and beauty, understanding and wonder. In our fragmented modern world, divided between mind and body, thinking and feeling, individual and community, these ancient insights offer healing. We can cultivate what the Neoplatonists called the inner eye, perception that sees beyond surface appearances to underlying unity. When you encounter art, nature, or human goodness, pause. Recognize that you're encountering not merely pleasant experiences, but glimpses of your own deepest potential. The journey is not one of escape, but of conscious participation in the eternal dance of beauty, truth, and goodness that connects all things back to their source. Ancient philosophers saw scientific thinking coming centuries before the modern era. Their search for natural explanations anticipated physics, biology, and psychology. Tonight's scientific worldview rests on their foundations, a legacy that invites us to embrace curiosity as a lifelong practice. The pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece, beginning with Thales in the early 6th century BCE, made a profound shift from mythological explanations to natural ones. They were called physikoi, natural philosophers, by Aristotle himself, distinguishing them from theologians who attributed phenomena to divine intervention. Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes sought the arche, the fundamental principle or origin of all things in water, the boundless and air respectively. This was not merely speculation, but the birth of systematic inquiry into the natural world. They began asking, what is the world made of? How does change occur? What principles govern reality? These questions form the very foundation of scientific methodology. This shift in thinking opened a floodgate. Building on this foundation, Democritus and Chrysippus proposed around 430 to 400 BCE that everything consists of indivisible atoms moving through empty space, a bold hypothesis that anticipated modern atomic theory by over 2 millennia. Anaxagoras, though scorned by many contemporaries, dared to claim the sun was a hot stone and the moon merely reflected its light. What seemed heresy then, telescopes would later confirm. Each insight built upon the last, creating not just new knowledge, but a new way of seeking knowledge. the Hippocratic physicians established that diseases follow natural laws, not divine punishment, revolutionizing medicine through systematic observation and rational treatment. Aristotle created the first systematic classification of living organisms in his Historia Animalium, organizing them based on their characteristics and behaviors. His method of empirical observation, watching, categorizing, comparing, established principles that guide biological science today. He recognized that organisms have specific functions and purposes, a concept that would later evolve into the study of adaptation and natural selection. In De Anima, On the Soul, Aristotle explored the nature of consciousness, memory, and learning, proposing theories about how we perceive, think, and remember that remarkably anticipate many contemporary cognitive science insights. The Stoics would later extend this natural philosophy to the mind itself, recognizing how our thoughts influence our physical well-being, a principle now central to psychosomatic medicine and integrative healthcare. These ancient insights remind us that human curiosity and systematic inquiry have always been the engines of progress. Our modern scientific worldview, from quantum physics to evolutionary biology, from neuroscience to climate science, stands upon foundations laid by these ancient seekers of natural explanations. The very habit of asking why and how, rather than accepting mystical answers, began with these philosophers. In our age of rapid technological advancement and scientific discovery, we carry forward their spirit. Like the ancient Greeks who wondered about the nature of reality, we too can approach the world with wonder, asking questions, seeking natural explanations, and building upon the accumulated wisdom of those who came before us. The scientific spirit they kindled thousands of years ago continues to illuminate our understanding of the universe. Carry this thought forward as we join their legacy of inquiry, knowing that each question we ask today continues an ancient conversation about the nature of existence itself. Before we gather the final threads of our journey, let us pause to consider how these ancient virtues speak to our most modern challenges, the digital realm that would have been unimaginable to these philosophers, yet which desperately needs their timeless wisdom. Consider Aristotle's Sophrosin, moderation, as you feel the pull of the endless scroll, the constant notification, the addictive draw of the infinite feed. The ancients understood that freedom comes not from limitless indulgence, but from wisdom in choosing what serves our flourishing. When we check our phones compulsively, when we sacrifice sleep for late-night scrolling, when we allow our attention to be fragmented by digital demands, we stray from moderation's balanced path. But when we approach technology with intention, setting boundaries, practicing digital Sabbaths, using tools rather than being used by them, we honor this timeless virtue. Think of courage, Andrea, when you face the choice between authentic expression and performative engagement, between mob mentality and standing alone for truth. The Greek philosopher Epictetus reminds us that while we cannot control what happens to us, we can control our responses. In digital forums, this translates to choosing kindness over cruelty, truth over convenience, and authentic expression over mere performance. True digital courage means resisting the herd mentality that online spaces can foster, and instead standing for principles even when standing alone. Remember aletheia, truthfulness, in a world of deepfakes, filter bubbles, and algorithmic manipulation. The ancient commitment to truth feels both urgent and challenging today. Aristotle taught that truthfulness involves both honesty in our words and integrity in our actions. Digital truthfulness means fact-checking before sharing, acknowledging when we don't know something, and maintaining consistent values across our online and offline personas. It means recognizing that behind every avatar lives a human being deserving of respect, that our words carry real weight in digital spaces just as they did in the ancient agora, and that authenticity is a choice we make in every click, every post, every interaction. When we speak truthfully online, we contribute to a digital ecosystem where knowledge can flourish and genuine connection becomes possible. These virtues, moderation, courage, truthfulness, offer not rules to follow, but questions to carry. Am I using this tool with intention? Am I choosing courage over comfort? Am I honoring truth over convenience? In these small moments of conscious choice, ancient wisdom becomes practical guidance for contemporary living. Ancient philosophers, in their profound contemplation of human nature, seemed to glimpse something that would only become visible to us centuries later. They understood that the great patterns of human experience, the rise and fall of empires, the cycles of moral confusion and renewal, the eternal dance between order and chaos, these were not random occurrences, but part of a deeper rhythm in the human story. Their wisdom was not merely about understanding their own time, but about recognizing the cyclical nature of human challenge itself. Standing in our own era of uncertainty, we find ourselves returning to the same fundamental questions that have guided philosophers since antiquity. Consider how political turmoil follows patterns that ancient observers would find hauntingly familiar. The Roman statesman Cicero, in his contemplations on the nature of republics during the 1st century BCE, warned that democracies tend toward corruption when citizens lose sight of virtue and embrace selfish ambition. Yet we witness similar cycles across nations, polarization intensifying, trust in institutions wavering, the very foundations of civic discourse being tested. The ancient Greeks, through Heraclitus, taught us that character is destiny, that a society's values determine its trajectory. This insight speaks directly to our contemporary moment, where moral confusion often precedes political crisis, where the erosion of shared principles creates the space for authoritarian appeals to order. The Stoic philosophers understood something crucial about these cycles, that wisdom must be continually renewed, not because human nature changes, but because each generation must discover and internalize timeless truths for themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that the difficulty of life comes not from external circumstances, but from our resistance to accepting what we cannot change. Yet in our age of information overload and constant distraction, we find ourselves forgetting these essential lessons. We reinvent problems that have been contemplated for millennia, not because the solutions are elusive, but because wisdom requires patience, reflection, and the humility to learn from those who came before us. The ancient philosophers' greatest insight was not just that these cycles exist, but that within each cycle lies the opportunity for renewal. They understood that while human challenges may repeat in their essential nature, our response to them remains always within our control. This is where their wisdom becomes practically applicable today. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by the apparent repetition of crisis, we can ground ourselves in timeless principles, practicing daily reflection, cultivating virtue regardless of external circumstances, maintaining hope in the possibility of renewal even when despair seems more reasonable. The eternal return of wisdom is not a curse of repetition, but a gift of continuity, the assurance that each generation has the opportunity to participate in the great human project of understanding and improving our condition through philosophical contemplation and ethical action. Different philosophies are not rivals, but parts of a greater whole. Imagine standing in a vast amphitheater of human thought, where voices from across millennia speak not in discord, but in harmony. Here, the Stoic speaks of virtue, the Epicurean of pleasure, the Platonist of beauty, the Aristotelian of reason, and we begin to hear not competing truths, but notes in an ancient symphony of wisdom. The Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino called this the Prisca Theologia, the eternal theology that echoes through all genuine philosophical traditions. Each school, from the rigorous logic of the Cynics to the mystical meditations of the Neoplatonists, contributes its unique instrument to this grand composition of human understanding. We can turn our attention to the shared themes that unite these seemingly different approaches to wisdom. Consider virtue. The Stoics taught us that virtue is sufficient for happiness, while Aristotle showed us virtue as the golden mean between extremes. The Epicureans spoke of pleasure, but not as the vulgar pursuit of immediate gratification, rather as the deeper tranquility of the soul achieved through wisdom. Each tradition, in its own way, recognized that the cultivation of character, whatever they called it, forms the foundation of a meaningful life. This is not contradiction, but complementary wisdom from different angles of the same truth, that human flourishing depends upon the development of our highest capacities. Breathe into this understanding as we consider reason itself, that divine spark that links us to the eternal. The Stoics taught that reason is the law of the universe, the logos that governs all things. Aristotle demonstrated how reason, working through empirical observation and logical deduction, reveals the hidden patterns of nature. The Pythagoreans saw in mathematical reasoning the very structure of reality itself. Here again, we find not competing philosophies of knowledge, but different emphases within the same grand inquiry. How can human reason best understand and participate in the order of existence? Each tradition contributes insights that, when woven together, create a more complete understanding of how we might live according to wisdom. And in this harmonious view, inner peace emerges not as the absence of challenge, but as the presence of inner harmony, the alignment of thought, emotion, and action with wisdom. The Stoic seeks apatheia, freedom from destructive passions, while the Epicurean pursues ataraxia, tranquility of mind. The Platonist seeks the peace that comes from contemplating eternal truths. The Aristotelian, the satisfaction of flourishing through virtue in community. Each path leads to the same destination, a state of being where inner conflict dissolves into the deeper satisfaction of living wisely. This is the peace that ancient philosophy offered, not as escape from the world, but as the foundation for engaging with it most fully. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider how you might blend these diverse insights into your own personal philosophy, taking what resonates from each school, creating your own synthesis of eternal wisdom. In this final reflection, we gather the threads of our journey. We began with Thales, daring to ask if nature follows principles rather than divine whims. We end having walked with minds that shaped how humanity thinks about reality itself. But what have we truly learned? Not just facts about ancient thinkers, something deeper, that the questions they asked are your questions too. What is real? How should I live? What can I know? What is justice? What is beautiful? These aren't abstract puzzles. They're the texture of your daily existence. When you pause before reacting in anger, you walk with the Stoics. When you question whether accumulating more will bring satisfaction, you sit in Epicurus' garden. When you examine your beliefs rather than accepting them blindly, you practice Socratic wisdom. When you seek beauty as a path to truth, you ascend with the Neoplatonists. The gift these ancient thinkers offer is not answers. It's a way of being with questions. Aristotle showed us that excellence comes through practice, not perfection. Heraclitus taught us to flow with change rather than resist it. Parmenides reminded us that beneath all flux lies unchanging truth. Each contributed not dogma, but perspective, a lens through which to view existence more clearly. And here's what makes their wisdom eternal. They addressed not the transient concerns of their particular moment, but the permanent conditions of human existence. We still face uncertainty. We still struggle with desire and fear. We still wonder how to live justly in unjust times. We still seek meaning amid chaos, but we no longer face these challenges alone. We carry within us the accumulated wisdom of millennia, the Stoic's serenity, the Epicurean's simplicity, the Platonist's vision of transcendent truth, the Aristotelian's practical wisdom. These aren't museum pieces. They're living traditions, waiting to be embodied in your choices. What remains for you to carry forward? Perhaps simply this: the courage to live examined lives, to pause in the space between stimulus and response, to question what you think you know, to cultivate virtue as Aristotle defined it, not as moral perfection, but as excellence in becoming fully human. The ancient Greeks understood that wisdom is not accumulated knowledge, but transformed being. Philosophy was never meant to be studied. It was meant to be lived, in how you greet tomorrow's morning, in how you respond when plans crumble, in how you choose again and again, presence over distraction, wisdom over convenience, courage over comfort. We end not where we began, but somewhere new. You are not the same person who started this journey. You've walked with the greatest minds humanity has produced. You've touched ideas that have shaped civilizations. You've discovered that ancient wisdom is not ancient at all. It's as immediate as your next breath. The question of being, what it means to exist, to be fully human, to live wisely, this question has no final answer because it is not a problem to be solved. It is an invitation to be accepted, renewed each morning, in each choice. Rest now, dear listener. You have walked with philosophers. You carry their wisdom forward. And in the quiet of this moment, you participate in the same mystery that captivated Thales as he gazed at stars. The profound wonder of existence itself. You are. And that is not just enough. It is everything.